Hey everyone, hope you guys are doing well. A little bit different today. We're going to try building out the cheat sheet. It will be a new series completely for this channel. And of course, you're looking at the Euros here, but we're going to start with building out, our FPL cheat sheets really for the purposes of FPL 23-24. So that is something I'm extremely keen on doing now. And obviously, this is your first sort of look into this, which hopefully will be quite insightful for you guys as well. So yeah, and in time, I think I might change this into potentially just being maybe a piece of members only content. This will be, yeah, as I said, the first sort of trial run of it, and it gives you a bit of insight in terms of how I sort of look at things in terms of this funny little game called FPL. So I mean, in terms of the budget positions, like, I mean, everyone wants ideally a couple midfielders. I think from memory, to be honest, there's no one that completely catches my eye. So I think I'm just gonna have to ignore the position for now. And obviously, Rogers becomes our immediate first asset. We will add some more fixtures. I tend to look at fixtures maybe something like game weeks 1 to 6, game weeks 1 to 8. It really depends on, of course, whether I know a lot of people will be pursuing a certain strategy. So, with the reality of FPL game week 1, a lot of people are at least planning to game week 4. I know some people are planning on wildcarding game week 4, game week 5, game week 6, but I only tend to show game weeks 1 to 3, but that doesn't mean that I'm not reflecting game weeks after that. So when we talk about Morgan Rogers, obviously he's just going to be, I mean, he's not even going to be a new pick because this is just the first cheat sheet. So that's that. I tend to look for players first and sort of build from memory what I think are the sort of best valuations of players. Now, Morgan Rogers obviously is that interesting price point where he's bucketed with a lot of the 5.5s. And arguably, of course, if he's a nailed player, he's already better than a lot of these players. But I don't think that necessarily means that the other players are bad. It just means that Morgan Rogers is that interesting. I think Semenyo will definitely be quite high up here. I'll probably put Cho as a little bit of a yellow pick early doors. Just these are interesting picks at that sort of price point for me. And then obviously we move into effectively 6.5s where there's so much value in players in multiple positions there. So I think starting off with, we have Gibbs White, you have Nkunku, you have Brennan Johnson, we have Garnacho as well. These are the players that are quite interesting to me. There's also Bailey, who I think arguably deserves to be quite high up here too. We just had the Diaby transfer finalized, so that's really helpful. And I'll add the underlying stats a little bit later. Obviously, I can remove these fixtures and we can update that soon. Let's see. Hey everyone, hope you guys are doing well. This is new, like it. Yeah, appreciate that. Am I going no Holland? Right now I'm sort of inclined to doing it. Pereira is actually a great pick, to be honest. Good spot. I would say Pereira would still bucket as a bit of a yellow pick. The only issue I don't really like about Pereira is, look, his minutes always seem to be a little bit fragile, so that's why I don't really love him too much, because he's a bit more of a 75-minute player, whereas obviously when you look at Hudson-Odoi, Semenyo, and Rogers, ideally they play more than that, and Rogers is a little bit different because he's a huge open play threat, whereas Andres Pereira is mostly, his value to the game is mostly through set pieces. So if you don't foresee Andres Pereira being that interesting in open play, that makes a huge difference. Elliott, I don't think we can put him at the start of the season. He might be a differential for sure. But I would say I'd probably tier the 6.5 like that for now. Although Sobo, I think, is interesting. Keep in mind as well that Sobo did end the season extremely fatigued, and even under international duty didn't look quite at his best. So that's something I'm factoring in as well. Next bucket is going to be 7.0 to 7.5s. I mean, Ahmad is interesting, but I would never, for example, recommend him in game week 1, right? Everyone is going to anticipate that. You're anticipating that, let's say, Garnacho and Rashford and look, a mix of Xerxes and Hoyland will start. in those 3 attacking positions. So whilst Ahmad will probably have a key, like Ahmad's going to take away from Garnacho, which is also why Garnacho's dropped a little bit, right? What I tend to look at, so you won't necessarily see that, is I tend to pay reference to a lot of data. So I look at, for example, Fantasy Football Hub, the Opta stats, link in bio, obviously, but I look at the stats for the players from the previous season. I also look at some of the projections in terms of fixture difficulty. I also tend to look at some of the team models that we have in FPL, shared by some of the really kind people in the sort of FPL space. So 11 my friend, he has a team model. I really respect the work that he does. And I think it's very helpful in terms of contextualizing, what is strong about a team, what is weak about a team. Obviously, players, are separate. So the example that I like giving now is Chris Wood has really, really good fixtures. But we know that Nottingham Forest is a weak defensive team, or offensive team rather. However, you also know that Chris Wood, his XG is much higher than a lot of the center forwards, even from better offenses. So you can already see that at least the style of play for Nottingham Forest is very much catered towards creating Chris Wood output. So something to mention. So worth recognizing, of course, team data, but also really worth recognizing individual player level data. So yeah, in the midfield position, have I missed anyone so far when it comes to the price point up to 6.5? I mean, yes, of course, people I think are going to be thinking about, hey, what about Rice? What about Rodrigo? I'd probably still pass on them for now. All things considered, maybe Kudus is someone that I've missed. I unfortunately do think that Kudus, he does seem to be benefiting from the shots on target and the fouls drawn new metrics, but my issue really with him is more so Key Chan's interesting as well, but Wolves have some pretty bad fixtures. But yeah, I think my issue with him is just the bad fixtures for West Ham early doors. Would I really be that keen on jumping on Kudus? Probably not. When they have better fixtures, we can definitely consider him. And let me wipe the slate clean here as well. What's the news on Sancho? I think he seems to be staying. Silva has decent enough threat. We talk about Bernardo. I'd probably pass on him still, right? Bernardo Silva, when you look at Bernardo Silva's underlying stats, it's always a little bit dull, and that's because he's a little bit of a utility player for Man City. So at 6.5, I think he has good, XA, for example, but it's not like he's on a lot of set pieces. So avenues towards bonus are a bit reduced. He's more of an open play threat than anything. And yeah, once again, hey, sir, I haven't seen anyone picking Bernardo Silva. You're not making a mistake, to be honest. I don't think it's really about that. I think it's just about avenues to bonus, because one of the issues, right, is if you look at Gibbs White, similar stats to Bernardo, but how realistic is it that Gibbs White can get, the additional extra bonus points, whereas Bernardo's competing with a lot of major threats in the team, right? Not only the defense, who are likely to get a clean sheet, it's also, of course, the issue with players like Foden and Haaland just stealing all the bonus really from him. Whereas with Gibbs White, realistically, where's the bonus coming from Nottingham Forest? It's Wood, it's Gibbs White. That's pretty much it. Maybe Hudson-Odoi, maybe Elanga on a certain game. As far as Jai, congratulations on the previous season. I'll probably not do team ratings, to be honest, on a video like this. I might do a team rating later on. Harvey Elliott will 100% be a steal if he gets good playing time, but you need to also factor in that, for example, FPL is about taking punts, but FPL is also about taking measured punts. I'm not going to expect the season to have Harvey Elliott starting consistently. And if he does, of course, we'll sort of change our mind on that. But you don't really want to jump on a player who's more likely than not going to be playing lesser minutes as a center mid or on the bench, right? Ideally, the best world for Harvey Elliott is if he sort of takes away Salah's minutes, which is, in my opinion, still unlikely. Smith Rowe, interesting, of course, if he transfers. Bruno Guimaraes, he did really well overall, but I think part of that too is because availability is really key, right? So when you look at Rodri, Rice, Bruno Guimaraes, these are players who benefit a lot. And of course, he does benefit from fouls drawn as well. But generally speaking, these are players who get more points because they've played more of the season, as opposed to I would like to start any sort of specific game week with Bruno Guimaraes as an example. I'd probably still bucket him, honestly, as an orange pick, but I don't think he's a bad pick by any means. Thanks, Joe Kneecap, as well. Congratulations as well. Really happy that you made the top 100. That's amazing. Bailey could be game breaking. I agree with that. Bonus points, yep. We've discussed that. Let's see. Transfers, I think maybe if Tony moves to Tottenham, that could be interesting. Kulusevski might start with matters at Cam. Yeah. Are you talking about impacts in terms of Brennan Johnson's minutes, potentially? Or you just talk about how Kulusevski isn't really, for example, overriding Brennan Johnson minutes? If you're considering Bruno Guimaraes in an attacking triple up. See, that's interesting because I think I'd be so much more tempted in Gordon early doors, but I can kind of understand. I mean, Bruno's not, I wouldn't say he's a bad pick at all. I mean, that's just, he's simply not. But for a player who played so many minutes, I think that's where his value comes from. It's not really the fact that if, for example, at the start of the season, you suddenly knew that Bailey could play more minutes, or at least within a certain period of games, you could capture good Bailey minutes over, Leicester, Everton, Wolves, Ipswich, these sorts of fixtures. I'd much rather take Bailey every day than what I feel like is a little bit, I think, high floor in terms of Bruno Guimaraes, but definitely lower ceiling, just given the position that he plays. In the 7.0 bucket, since I don't think I've missed on, I'm not that high on Kulusevski, if I'm being completely honest as well. I think Kulusevski played a lot of minutes last season and was a pretty dull pick, whereas Johnson played much fewer minutes and still, I think, actually outscored Kulusevski. So it kind of really shows you, and particularly when you look at underlying data as well, like Brennan Johnson has much better underlying stats than, let's say, a Kulusevski. What I tend to like showing as well is, I think probably, I will move the XGI graphic to being NPXGI, because I think that gives a little bit of a better perspective for some managers on how good a player is. And then I think what I'll do is probably do a set piece sort of video as well, which reflects on some players a bit better. Because, for example, Palmer being on penalties is very influential, but you shouldn't necessarily compare a player's NPXG with someone else's XG, if that makes sense. So, for example, Brennan Johnson, what's interesting about him is he is just very, 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 very good at NPXGI. But I think I'll split this. Oops. I'll probably make this NPXG, and I'll probably make this XGA. So, or XAG rather, X assisted goals. So someone like Brennan Johnson becomes interesting in these metrics, but actually is really bad at converting them. So 0.44, 0.35. That's like, I just want to show kind of how strong he is compared to a player, and Bailey as well. These are the players that definitely, if you can ever basically enter a period where their minutes are really good, they become extremely exciting. Bailey is 0.27 on MPXG and super prolific sort of creator. Oh, right. Sorry. This is obviously, I've already set up a little bit of a conditional formatting here. Bellingham for 7 million. You're in. That will change. Brennan. Yeah, I love Brennan. Nice to see you around, Chai. Would you even consider Paqueta? Depends if he actually is, if we think he's going to start playing football again. Champions League is starting earlier this year. Do you think Villa assets? I mean, they will get impacted, but keep in mind, of course, a lot of people are planning a little bit of an earlier wild card and things like that, right? Timber could play a key role, 100%. I agree with that. But you'll have to also sort of take into the fact whether you imagine that Timber can play every single game, because unfortunately, he's also priced at a position where if you're suddenly getting Timber benchings, you're in a really bad spot, I think, in terms of how you've managed your budget in FPL. So I wanted to highlight these key players. Let's do Nkunku as well. Nkunku's a little bit interesting because I tend to not like to feature players' minutes if they played very reduced minutes. And honestly, I'm a little bit uncomfortable sharing the Nkunku data because I think he didn't play enough minutes last season. So I'll definitely put an asterisk on him. So yeah, a little bit uncomfortable with sharing that, I guess. But I mean, well, we can put an asterisk on Nkunku. Yeah. I mean, as you can see, like a lot of the value seems to be coming from the 6.5 mid position. But there's also going to be a huge factor as well with fixture difficulty, right? We don't have, for example, let's say a Newcastle attacker that I like to have is someone like Anthony Gordon, who has probably less good underlying stats compared to some of these players here, but clearly will have better minutes, will also have better fixtures, and that makes a huge difference. Gibbs White, another player to add here. 0.17. Keep in mind, of course, he's a penalty taker. So that's another sort of consideration where potentially I might make another column for the next season. Oh, I also realized that I'm hiding the date. I'm so sorry about that. Such a rookie mistake. We could probably look at fixtures a little bit later, I wonder. Yeah, I could hide these boxes for now. And we can just purely look at some of the data for some of these players. Because Socek being all right mid, I think the issue when you're looking at I think the issue with someone like Daichi Kamada, right, is look at his sort of career numbers, and you'll probably just recognize that ultimately he's a bit of a center mid, although the role that he was sort of playing in, Frankfurt was very, very attacking. So there's a bit of a mix with like what is his role under Lazio and what is his role generally speaking. He's had some really good career numbers, but we also tend to say that there's a bit of Bundesliga tax as well. So whilst his peak season was something like 0.39 expected goals and 0.14 expected assisted goals, the issue is that he's probably on balance average close to 0.2, 0.3-ish, and you don't really know exactly what role he's going to play for the team, because the production will obviously be impacted by the fact that unfortunately Crystal Palace are not going to be that attacking as a team. Rodgers in a league of his own. I think yes and no. I think in the sense that he plays for a very strong team, and if he has good minutes for Aston Villa at the start of the season, he is in a league of his own. But it's not like he's got set pieces or other things that make him a little bit game breaking as a pick, right? Or penalties, things like that. So I like Rodgers, but I think not that much. So much that, for example, like if I went for a 3-5-2 draft and I went for Salah only, I don't see myself necessarily going for Rodgers. I'd much rather go Bailey, I would say, at 6.5. Do you think McGinn? I think McGinn. I mean, why do we think McGinn will get penalties though? He's only taken one penalty in his career. Yeah. I mean, he is in a league of his own because of that. One of the issues with that as well, though, and you know what's funny is, Cesar, I've rated your draft, and I think the one thing that I don't like about the draft is because if you have a 5.5 and a 5.0, and if there's any issues with Rodgers, right? What do you do when you want to move things around? XAG just means expected assisted goals. So it's sort of like a creativity metric, right? It means that you're effectively looking at all the sort of passes that people made for the people who took a certain shot. So for example, XG reflects all the sort of average shot positions that you've taken for shots that you actually have taken, and assisted goals just means that if you were to assist that shot, what was the quality of that assist? You actually changed it because of that reason. See, I actually rated your draft, and obviously, I respect you as a manager, but yeah, I think that was the issue with my draft when I looked at it, and so that's why I think I'd prefer a draft that had maybe Rodgers plus 0.5 mil, maybe, right? So that you remain a little bit more flexible within that territory. All right. Sorry, a lot of sort of little bit of segueing into stuff. I think Rashford's the only interesting 7.0, right? And honestly, I've got to say, but Rashford does seem a little bit dull to start the season for me, so I'm not that high on him, unfortunately. So I apologize to Rashford fans in the world. This is obviously the Trossard and Martinelli price point, and I've got to be honest as well. I think those players have to also jump into the differential bucket because yes, we did end the season off with Trossard being interesting, but I've got no interest in really going for Trossard early doors because it's a bit of a gamble for the minutes. And even amongst Arsenal players, you'd argue that a transfer has to be forced pretty early on. So that's, I think, one thing that I don't particularly like, unfortunately, about Martinelli and Trossard. I mean, I haven't given them basically any thought, but of course, if there's an injury, something like that happens, then the game starts to break and fall apart a little bit. And then I think Gordon becomes the supreme leader of this position, and Bowen. I mean, Bowen is Bowen, but I think I'd probably even rate Bowen as a differential starting off the season. A little bit disrespectful to Bowen, but hey, this is my cheat sheet. But really, it's a reflection of the West Ham fixtures, and also, yes, of course, you have a change in manager, but how fast are you able to sort of remodify the team, and of course, they seem like they're still lagging behind in terms of transfers. Oh, I missed out on the best 7.0 in the game. Mr. Eze himself. I think Mbumo falls into this bracket, but unfortunately, Mbumo also. My issue with Mbumo is until Tony's gone, no one's going to touch Mbumo, and the early fixtures are just bad, right? So the whole point of FPL is you go for players at the right times. Like, this is not the right time to go for Mbumo, personally. Is the general gist of where I'm going with that. Madison as well, I guess, exists around here. Would I think Madison at the start of the season could be a touch more interesting than Bowen? I think potentially. Just because Tottenham do start with 2 good fixtures. Yeah. Mbumo better pick than those 3. When we say those 3, do you mean like Rashford, Martinelli, and Trossard? I agree with you if he's on pens. But if he's not on pens and the fixtures are that bad for Brentford to start, then that's the issue, right? Which is why I have Mbumo as low as he is right now. The NPX sheet that he had last season was really good, though. Nico Jackson's a forward, so this is just a midfield cheat sheet. Yeah, Jota will 100% be here. But Jota, I believe, was he classified as a forward, or did I get something wrong? I think he's a midfielder, right? My issue with Jota is it's minutes, right? Because obviously the ceiling's great, but can you capitalize on those minutes? So I'm not sure if I would really class him as a green pick for the time being. Anyone at 8.0? Not that I'm really aware of. I think 8.5 becomes the next bracket, right? Where it's just Odegaard and Bruno. And to be honest, I would say they're actually both amazing to start the season with. So anyone else really? I think they're in a league of their own. And then it becomes interesting, right? I honestly don't think that FPL have done pricing poorly at all. And at the start of the season, I honestly, I have no issues with anyone going with any pick that is between the Foden bracket. And I think what I'll do this season is, because to me, these players are all premiums, is I would rather have Foden, Saka, Son all together, and maybe when the fixtures are a little bit more evident, I'll change my mind on them. Maybe for now, I'd say with Son, the only concern that I have in my mind is whether he gets to start the season in the right position, in the sense that he'll be a center forward. Now, if they sign Tony, it's conditional, and I think Son would immediately drop. And I think, yeah, I think a lot of us probably, I don't see a single Saka and Joss, but I think part of that might be European duty and just thinking about whether he needs some time off to sort of manage his Achilles injury, that sort of thing. Would you pick Fernandes or Odegaard if I could only have one? I think I'd probably go with Odegaard personally. But I can understand a lot of people preferring Bruno just for penalties. Yeah, Son back to his natural left wing just means he's just going to be a worse pick, right? But keep in mind that Barnes is actually a good point, actually. To be honest, Almiron is still in the club, right? Pascal Gross, yeah. I mean, Brighton's fixtures are pretty bad to start the season. Rice, I've got no interest in Rice. Yes, of course, he plays for one of the best teams in football, but when you look at Rice's stats, they are not interesting whatsoever. I don't think Saka has a tough first 5, because you always have to put in the context that Arsenal are just that good of a team. So it's, I mean, maybe I'll drop Saka here, but, and Son is also quite conditional. So I think if he plays left wing, like if you assume both, I imagine, I think that's the issue. And yeah. And Nkunku. I think we have Nkunku on this list, right? Oh, you can't see the changes because it's cut off? Yeah, of course, I'm an idiot. Yeah, look at me. Let me just resize this a little bit better. Yeah, I might as well just clip all of this and then you guys can see the full picture. Oh, well, I guess I could just scroll down a little bit. I don't think that really hurts the quality of the product. So I'll just do that instead. Heat chant fixtures, yeah, I think they're quite bad. If Tony goes to Spurs, would I choose him? I think I'll definitely consider it, honestly. For me, the Sun conditional is the positioning element. Like, I'm not too high, too low. Like, if Richarlison is still injured and they don't sign Tony by game week 1, if you can get game week 1, game week 2 Sun at center forward, he becomes quite insane. Good to have the cheat sheet chats back. Yeah, this is something I wanted to do, and obviously I'll work on improving the series as it goes. As the season goes on, I'll be able to add the data immediately, but I kind of just wanted to tier people just on initially just my thoughts, and then tomorrow I think I'll add all the data for the players. Obviously, most of the data is honestly, like, not even joking, within my head because I think about this a lot, but in terms of actually listing it all out right now, I haven't gone through that process yet. Kulishevsky, once again, as I said, I think he's always had really like poor underlying data for me, so I don't have too much interest in him as a player, if I'm honest. So Morgan Rogers we're adding here, but keep in mind, of course, he didn't play too many minutes last season. So whenever you look at a player like, let's say, Nkunku and Morgan Rogers, who didn't play that many minutes, a lot of the insights that we're going to get are not, of sufficient quality, in my opinion. We can look at Semenyo as well. He's a player that I quite like. And of course, you'll see that there's basically almost like a grading scale, but Semenyo actually does relatively well in terms of goals and assists as well. So really good production over a pretty consistent season for him as well. And I can just bring in Hudson-Odoi, you'll notice as well, has really poor underlying stats. So for example, when I add him in, you'll get a chance to have a look at that. And it's not like he's on necessarily any set pieces. So yeah, I mean, a lot of this is all just pure construction in terms of open play. But of course he's performed well too. So goals and assists strong for sure. We did discuss Daichi Kamada a little bit. I don't mind him too much. There's also, I guess, Franca as well at 4.5. I mean, I can leave him here for now, but I think the way things seem to go for Crystal Palace is that they will probably be spending a lot more money on sort of bolstering certain positions. So I'm not really that keen on sort of believing that Frank is going to be some sort of out and out starter at the start of the season, but definitely for Kamada, I think I can say that. His role, once again, as I said, will be a little bit limited. So unfortunately, his Lazio season was poor. So, when you're looking at the data here, it's not great, but what can you do, unfortunately, in a situation like that? So yeah, it looks like his production's really subpar, but that's just the reality of life sometimes. And Pereira, another thing that we need to evaluate too is how realistic is someone actually going to get the minutes that we want them to have. So for example, like Andreas Pereira, his stats are actually quite nice considering the 5.5s and the 5.0s, but you also have to put it into context that he doesn't play 90 minutes a game. He's more of a 75-minute player. I don't think Ahmed is the choice at the start of the season. What do you do for work? You seem like you'd be a great data analyst. I do auditing, so I suppose. So I do work with numbers, but would Werner have good minutes? I'm not so sure right now. Saka's not traveling to USA. Should be fine for game week 1. He's on penalties. Why yellow? I mean, there's nothing really wrong with Saka, actually, as I said. I think it's just more of a preference for hopefully better minutes for other players and him being a little bit of a transfer out option for game week 4 or 5. But you're right. He does really deserve to be green. I agree with you. You're live good. Nothing to watch. That's cool speed. Nice to see around. Mintek could be a steal if he starts ahead of March. Yeah, but then the issue is going to be rotation, right? So I mean, with Brighton, they actually have a lot of depth back at the club. So even though you might have someone starting game week 1, you need to have also a lot of confidence that they continue to start after game week 1, so that you're not forcing transfers in advance and that their minutes are going to be very good. And I think that's the issue with some of the Brighton players. Not to mention as well that Brighton have some pretty bad fixtures. Um, so yeah, you can see in terms of the bucket of 0.5 players, it's not like anyone really stands out. Although Semenyo, I think if he's nailed, is interesting, and so is Rogers for the most part. Haaland has a hip injury. Is that news to me? I can't see anything about. No, I don't see anything about Haaland having a hip injury. Um, that sounds bad because it's like I want to watch you if something was the best thing to watch. Fair enough. Elanga has better numbers than Hudson-Odoi, but the issue with Elanga is that his minutes did dovetail a little bit at the end of the season. You're actually right. His underlying data is much better. But that's why I think sometimes I need to give you guys a little bit of context in some of the videos based on what I've seen, close to the end of the last season. Where, for example, if you look at his minutes close to the end of the season, Elanga's minutes actually dropped off a cliff. So yeah, good point. Actually, he's got great underlying data, and I'm about to put that now, but I would say he's definitely a differential for me because I'm not sure if I can guarantee his minutes per se. So yeah, that's an unfortunate one, but really good production. Opinions on triple Fulham defense? Well, I think it doesn't make any sense. I think the only player I'd like is Robinson personally. Will I consider Mainu? Probably not. Pereira's a good option for me to play in 2, 3, 4, and 6 with your setup. Why is Bowen so low? Just a fixture thing. Just a fixture thing. I mean, yeah, arguably you can say he's a yellow pick because his minutes should be good. And to be, yeah, maybe I'm disrespecting Bowen a little bit too much. I can agree to that argument. I'm always disrespecting Bowen. Yeah, but that's because I don't get fake goals from Bowen. You know what I mean? Why Robinson over Castagna? His underlying stats are a touch better. And that's pretty much it. What do I think about Trippier? I think the issue is the bonus point system seems to have taken a little bit away from him. So unless we're guaranteeing that Newcastle will get a lot more clean sheets, then I think that takes away from a lot of his points avenues, right? And or rather, like maybe like you're taking 5 to 10% of his points away, specifically Trippier, specifically Porro. So it really comes down to whether you think that Newcastle's defense will start performing in the season early doors as a really strong team. And I think believing that to be the case is a little bit of an overstepping of what we probably left the season sort of watching from that team. Garnacho, as you can see, his numbers are not that prolific, but they're still decent. Sobo, obviously, last season, unfortunately, the data wasn't that good. But also, going back to previous seasons, it's not like Sobo was some sort of absolute monster, right? So I don't think we need to overplay. And you're about to see Bruno Guimaraes as a good example of why some players aren't that interesting. Decent underlying numbers, I guess, for the position that he plays on the pitch. But and we know that the fouls drawn metric should really help Bruno Guimaraes. But yeah, pretty boring, as you can see. So it's not like, if we're talking, I suppose, ceiling and if you can get the minutes rights for any certain player, you're going to have an issue there. And the same thing with Kudus, unfortunately. But you hope that a better attacking manager with West Ham can probably pull something out of him. To be honest, you know what? I'm going to drop Bowen again. I'm sorry. I'm going to do it. I just think that maybe I've disrespected Kudus, I guess. But their opening fixtures are really not that good. It's Aston Villa, then Palace away, then Man City, then Fulham away, then Chelsea at home as your opening 5. Do you really want to invest into that? I'm not sure. Aston Villa, you're playing them at home, which I think is nice. And that probably actually looks like the best fixture, ironically. Crystal Palace, you're playing away from home. I think that's a horrific fixture. Playing Man City at home, that's a horrific fixture. Fulham away from home once again, that's a pretty subpar fixture. And this is also considering that West Ham left the season looking like a pretty dire team. So I have to say, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to drop Bowen. And I'll disrespect him, unfortunately. Yeah, West Ham is an absolute no-go. There is a new manager. I think that helps. But yeah, I think it's more of a case where there should be growing pains for a team that are probably a little bit opposite to the way Julian Lopetegui would like to set up a team, if that makes sense. Cool. So I think we've covered a couple players here. Let's add in the some of the stats, I think, just for context of some of the more expensive players, right? Your Anthony Gordons of the world and so on and so forth. So as you can see, Gordon is not going to be that interesting on expected goals, but still actually higher than most of the players outside of Nkunku and Brennan Johnson. Nkunku with extremely small sample size, but as you can see, Brennan Johnson just has crazy, crazy numbers. Bit of a bonkers player, to be honest. You can look at Madison as well, just for a bit of context. And part of, like, I think the value early doors to Gordon is just that the fixtures are that good, right? So whenever you look at the stats, it's about contextualizing that if you have earlier fixtures, you'd imagine that the player would generally, perform a little bit better than they do on average. And that's sort of what the stats will sort of help in terms of being predictive about a player. Am I not interested in Holland for Gaming 2? Of course I'm interested in Holland Gaming 2, but I'm not I've got no interest in Holland if I'm going to start without Holland, if that makes sense. A lot of the statistics that I'm using are Opta Stats through Fantasy Football Hub, so you can find the link in description to find the sort of stats and data yourself. What are the columns for the data? Yeah, the columns for the data, excuse me, if we scroll to the top, are XG, column J, column K is... I should probably freeze frames somehow. Can you freeze? You can freeze frames, right? One row. Oh, perfect. Now we can now this is much better. We're already improving the quality of the series. What a W. So now you can see the columns. Why Son yellow and Brennan Johnson green? I mean, there's a difference in price. And I'm always sort of reflecting price. Hey Beardy, hope you're doing well. Bruno's a good price and somewhat under the radar. I absolutely think that that's the case when it comes to or pertains to Bruno. Let's do Odegaard as well. And keep in mind, XG and XAG is not the only two stats in the game that matter, right? If you take set pieces, if you take penalties, NPXG obviously doesn't reflect penalties, and XAG also doesn't really reflect the bonus impact of how good you are as a player. Like Odegaard, for example, if you take set pieces, or if Rice takes set pieces, or Saka takes set pieces, right? And in general, if you take a lot of, for example, like Odegaard is almost like the hub of the team. So the amount of chances he creates within the game is going to be quite high for Arsenal on average compared to any of the other attackers. So whilst Odegaard looks boring in terms of his open play data, he does a lot in terms of bonus points that can sort of positively benefit him as a player. And let's do Bruno now. But I think Bruno's, Bruno's NPXG last season was pretty horrific, but keep in mind he was sort of playing like a quarterback, and well, we don't want that to happen, but yeah. These are two players where I think a lot of their points come from bonus, and obviously for Bruno, it also comes from penalties. So that's why you need to sort of take some stuff with a grain of salt sometimes. Value added, appreciate that, RNL. Fran learning new Google Sheet tricks. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't ever freeze panes or stream myself using a sheet, right? So I do use freeze panes at work, but that's more because people review my work, unfortunately. Rice taking set piece. I mean, but that sort of reduced Odegaard's appeal last season. Diaz won't start. I'm not expecting him to start either, which is why he's a bit of an orange. But you'd have to imagine that Liverpool rotate a fair bit. the reason why I have Jota over Diaz is just because his underlying stats are just a touch better. But yeah, I think you might even argue that Jota is going to be basically an orange pick that I'd probably completely avoid um, entirely. Because I'd imagine that the starting 11 could probably have a trident of Salah, Darwin, and Gakpo maybe as the three. And then obviously Jota and Diaz as bench options. I'm not sure if Diaz will actually start over Gakpo, but you can let me know what you think about that. Harvey Elliott. Yeah, but Harvey Elliott can play a bit of a midfield role, which is... And then it also comes down to how you're going to optimize around triple Liverpool if you're actually ever going to go for it. Opinions are no Watkins. I think it's totally fine to not go Watkins. Gakpo is not just a striker at Cam. I don't really know what you mean. I think maybe under Klopp you can say that that's the case. But if you look at, for example, him in the Dutch team, him back in the Dutch league in the Eredivisie, he was a left winger. You think it's a Diaz, Gakpo, Salah front three? Interesting. I mean, I think we'll find out, though. I think it's very plausible that Gakpo can play left wing. Is KDB not worth considering at all? I mean, we'll see whether the Nunez ban happens. KDB is interesting for sure. And actually, yeah, I didn't even add him because I was thinking about the Saudi stuff. But I think KDB as well. I mean, at his career with his sort of age, I'd also think the minutes will be a touch worse. But he could very well start most of the season. But UCL also comes in pretty quick. I made FPL look easy last season. Well, I think I just got relatively lucky. And yeah, so I think someone did ask the question whether I did finish 437. I did. Definitely with the help of a lot of data, analytics, models, and solvers. Gakpo is way better left wing than central from a Dutch person. And that's the thing that we need to find out from the preseason, right? Like my assessment of the Liverpool players, you can take with a bit of a grain of salt because I think I'll change my opinion on a lot of these players. As you can see in the chat, everyone has disagreements on where Luis Diaz and Gakpo will play. And that's the issue with picking a pick that ultimately has variable minutes. With Darwin, it's a little bit different because he's got such good underlying stats that there's always the temptation to go for a player as long as he can start. But it's not like I would say everyone within the Liverpool team has such great underlying stats, although someone will obviously rightly make the point that I guess he doesn't finish to the degree that you'd expect, and someone like Jota might be, anecdotally a better finisher, and you might want to reflect that. But it's interesting. What rank am I aiming for? I don't really have a rank that I'm aiming for at all. Just hope to do well again. Hey, Jamie, hope you're doing well. There's no percentage of risk for going against Holland. I suppose the percentage of risk is his effective ownership multiplied by the captaincy almost every week. So you're basically going to be, if he's like 40% owned, you're running against, 80% of Holland every week as a negative to your team, I suppose. I don't really like Rodri as a sleeper. I think he overperformed a lot of his underlying stats last season. Plus, of course, he might get additional rest from playing so much minutes and, getting towards the final as well and literally getting injured within it, even if it was minor. So I'm not sure if I love Rodri. I think, once again, he's a player who, given the position that he takes in open play, for the most part, overperformed and has a lot of points last season because he played a lot of minutes, as opposed to he's super interesting. Son is a little bit low in the cheat sheet, so I had to scroll down. But yeah, here's Son for you. Yeah, we can start adding the stats as well for some of the key players. Son very assistive last season, considering that, I mean, he does take some set pieces as well, but not really, for example, the sort of long range free kick. So it's actually pretty impressive that he had such good open play numbers. Although Saka, you'll find, is even more impressive because he had a huge sort of increase in his NPXG last season compared to or compared to the previous one before that. So yeah, huge sort of great year for Saka in terms of NPXG, and of course, once again, non-pen, so really, really good numbers. KDB obviously going to be impacted by a little bit of sample size, and there's obviously going to be finishing quality as well as a reflection of all of this, right? I don't necessarily have the best way of sort of, I think, reflecting or showing how you could model finishing ability, but someone like Foden, I would say intuitively, you could probably argue that he's a very, very world-class finisher. So him having stats that aren't necessarily world-class doesn't really mean much to me if you think that he will generally overperform his finishing by a substantial margin. KDB stats are going to be quite crazy now. Wow. How insane is that? That green little bar here. My God. The most creative player in the league by a country mile. Palmer, I imagine, is going to be quite high. I think he might be second on the list so far. Let me put Palmer here. 0.38. So, yep, just about second. And then the big stat, of course, is NPXG, which is also very, very high. So, yeah, you can obviously see, I think FPL were very fair in terms of pricing Palmer up. An extremely prolific season, once again, without taking penalties into account. Would you go for Robertson and Wood? I think if Robertson was nailed, I would definitely go for Robertson. KDB might not leave. I think that's true. When will FPL review launch? I think probably in a few, maybe within a week's time, potentially. From your perspective, is it risky to go without him? Are we talking about Haaland? I mean, I think risk can be interpreted in multiple ways, right? Some people think about risk in terms of, ownership, but I think some people will also just say that if you think that your team is stronger without Haaland, then of course there's, I guess the risk is free, per se. Is there data around how age affects the stats of a player? I mean, I'm sure like a simple look, it would just be if you look at someone's FBref profile, or if you look at, Hub and Opta stats, and you just have a look at everyone's career stats. Generally, I imagine people's data will trend off, but it's obviously going to be dependent on the player as well, because player fitness is also an independent thing. You've got Muniz in your team instead of João Pedro. I think that does make sense. Muniz obviously has slightly less underlying stats compared to, let's say, a Chris Wood. A little bit higher maybe than João Pedro on the non-penalty stats. My issue with Muniz, I suppose, is whether he has penalties, which I don't think he does. And then I think he's just a good backup option, and I probably would prefer Armstrong over Muniz, but it's up to you. I think it's pretty close. He's not, I think he's definitely injured, but I think it's also a minor injury, and I definitely wouldn't replace him with Welbeck, because Welbeck isn't going to take penalties. So a huge part of the appeal for João Pedro is the fact that he takes penalties. God, I'm still kind of obsessed about how insane KDB's numbers were, but we're about to enter the legend himself, Mr. Mo. Oh, okay, I've ruined this. Basically going to be my captaincy for most of the early weeks, and actually now second, of course, in terms of this beautiful data set on, well, actually, sorry, Bailey, I definitely neglected, so I need to apologize to my man Bailey here, but some great numbers. So we'll do a little bit of conditional formatting, I would say. I think anyone who's literally above 0.3 is definitely an interesting pick, I would say. Salah is a risk with an untested manager working in a team built for Klopp's system. You can say that, but this is also one of the most prolific players we've seen. And I just think it's a bit of a reach to say that you're not going to expect much from one of the most prolific players ever to grace the Premier League, if that makes sense. I hope you agree to that, but I can understand if you don't. The upside of Captain Holland in Game Week 2 is worth it. I mean, how much do you think that upside is in terms of actual points? If you had to really calculate it out. Think about how much Haaland scores within a season. If you wanted to just do a very simple basic test. So last season, for example, he started 29 games, right? He got 217 points. If I just did a simple metric like that, he seems to average 7.5 points per start, right? If it's a good Haaland fixture, maybe you can sort of ascribe a little bit of a boost to that. So realistically, something like, I don't know, maybe 9 points, right? 9 times 2, something like that. So arguably an 18-point captaincy on average. If he overperforms that, which is entirely plausible, you will have a situation like Wolves where he scores a poker, or of course he can underscore that. But you just need to be cognizant, of course, that he's a forward as well. If a midfielder performs well like Salah can, he's also pretty close and within touching distance for most of the captaincies outside of that. And I think he also has a clear better captaincy on Game Week 5. So, of course, whilst you're expecting Haaland to nuke Ipswich, the average expectation for Haaland to do well on each week shouldn't be that high. So I think a lot of people are sort of fear-mongering a little bit as to how much points you can reasonably expect from Haaland on average. As I said, he can do better than average. He can do a lot worse than average. But yeah. One time where you needed to roll a transfer last season, you didn't buy Haaland for that game versus Wolves at home was when your season was done for. And that's just the nature of FPL sometimes, where I think when you go against or take that sort of risk against Haaland, sometimes you will suffer catastrophic events. But it could also go the other way. So yeah, I mean, I can remember countless instances where I was destroyed by Mateta, for example, or Elise or Pickford or Branthwaite. But that's okay. That happens in FPL. You're gonna get green arrows and red arrows. So if you set up a team that doesn't have Haaland, clearly you're going to expect to take an L on Game Week 2. But does it mean you take an L on Game Week 3? No. Does it mean you take an L on Game Week 4? Not really. And you're not going to suddenly chase the Ipswich fixture because it's going to be gone by Game Week 3. So maybe you're obviously happy with the way. Let's say if Haaland overperforms a little bit, maybe he gets, let's say, a hat-trick, right? Which is very plausible. There's still a reality where you can still catch up the amount of points technically lost because some of your other players could overperform as well. And that would be the players that you got as a result of the opportunity cost of not spending 15 million on Haaland. But it works both ways, as I said. And this is a game where obviously we just want the positive outcomes to happen to us. Am I really going without Haaland? For now, it seems like I probably won't. But yeah, those are just my early thoughts. I mean, most fixtures, let's be honest, are good for Haaland because he plays for Man City and he's one of the most prolific players and chance getters that we've had. So, as I said, he is 15 million, but you're always going to, if you're going no Haaland, you're going to go for players that hopefully try and match up to the amount of points that he would output and more, if possible. Do you think Reguilon will go back out on loan? I'm not really sure, to be honest, what the situation is with Reguilon. If De Bruyne leaves, does Haaland stocks go down? I actually haven't looked into the data yet of what Haaland's performance is like in terms of XG and XA with De Bruyne and without. So I probably need to have a look at that eventually one day and actually give you a correct answer that's actually backed up by data. But I think intuitively, I would say it seems like De Bruyne obviously helps Haaland. I think we've all seen that. But how much is the sort of impact on a percentage basis? I'm not sure. Why would Salah be a no-go? I'm sorry, I'm kind of confused. Yeah, once again, exactly. So I think I'll say it probably helps that he plays with De Bruyne, but I don't think it's suddenly that Haaland is a boring or not nearly as world-class a player, because we've seen plenty of strikers play with De Bruyne and they've definitely not produced anything at the level of Haaland, for example. So that's sort of the midfielder position. I wonder if I've missed anyone out. I'm sure I probably have. Let me have a think. I guess I've missed out on Sterling. Boohoo. I think I'll live. Bailey we've covered. Gross I missed out, but He-Chan I missed out because I just don't think they're particularly interesting if I'm honest. Same probably applies to Pedro Neto to start the season. I'd love to see Savio play, but I think his minutes will probably be a bit staggered until he eventually becomes either a permanent fixture in the team or, something happens. I guess Barnes would be the interesting pick as well. If Newcastle start with amazing fixtures, he's one where, well, I think, yeah, to be fair to Barnes, I'd probably class him as a bit of a differential right now. But his underlying data has always been really good, Barnes, that is. So he's certainly someone who's quite interesting. Yeah, and as you can see, pretty figures. Yeah, I think I'll probably actually class him as a yellow with an asterisk because it's one of those cases where if you think provisionally Barnes could start the season with really good minutes, that's great, but it is quite conditional, isn't it? So, whereas I think Brennan Johnson probably has more guarantees of good minutes early days. Vardy a starter for Leicester. Vardy is, I mean, I think he could be a starter in some games. Salah's a shadow of the player he once was. He plays too wide. Palmer over Salah every day. I mean, you have no idea of how Salah's going to play, I suppose, this season. And I think he had a pretty prolific season last year anyway, so I'm not really sure what the point is about that. He had 18 goals and 10 assists last season, whereas Palmer had 22 goals and 11 assists, and I think 9 of them were penalties, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, nine penalties as well. How many penalties did Salah take? Salah took. Well, to be fair, you can argue that Salah was pretty bad at missing some penalties. So he actually missed 2 penalties. He took 7. But Salah also played actually round about the same amount of minutes that Palmer did. So Salah played 2,500 minutes last season. Palmer played 2,600. The production from both players was actually relatively similar. All things being considered. So I don't think we necessarily need to overrate how washed Salah is, particularly when Liverpool have amazing fixtures to start the season with. Barco at 4 million is going to be good, but of course, how often are you going to play Barco? I guess early doors before Estupiñán comes back. Sergio Ramos, legend. Armstrong only good because of pens and minutes, right? A combination of the two, I would say. Stephen Cooper likes playing more younger players. Yeah, I don't know about. Look, honestly, I mean, when you look at Vardy, obviously with his age, I think he's just going to play a little bit of a veteran role for the team. Probably going to be a super sub for most parts, but he could start a game here and there. Sancho, yeah, I mean, I'm not predicting him at the start of the season, so he's not going to find his way onto my cheat sheet. The same way, for example, someone like Grealish is not going to be on the cheat sheet until he basically starts starting games consistently. And that's pretty much it, I think, in terms of most of the players who are interesting. Paqueta, yeah, like Adingra and Ciso, Minte, we'll probably look into these players a little bit later. But yeah, I think this is a good preliminary list for the midfielders. I don't think I've got too much to add. Obviously, Fatau is interesting, Mavididi as well. But yeah, for now, I think probably a small little pass on these players until we see a bit more from preseason, which makes me actually think, okay, I'm a bit more comfortable in certain players. Right, maybe I think that's it for now, because I think I've had a pretty good time in terms of covering the midfielders. I'll probably take a break here because obviously this is the end of the weekend. Harvey Barnes will bang. He'll be interesting. As I said, obviously, if you can get the minutes right with him, you'll probably be rewarded handsomely. I guess the same would apply to someone like Nkunku as well, to be quite honest. But yeah, we have some interesting players. And once again, we just need to be cognizant that penalties, set pieces do matter. Bonus points do matter as well. So, goals and assists aren't the end all be all. I think I'll probably be live tomorrow, potentially having a look at maybe the defender positions and the forward positions. I mean, preliminary, I would say the forward position feels a little bit more set in stone, and so does the defense. I also think people have maybe way too rigid opinions on Arsenal's early fixtures, because I think it really comes down to the fact that Arsenal's one of the strongest defenses we've ever seen, and I think people are slightly underrating how impressive it is to be a top defense and how much separation there is between an Arsenal versus, unfortunately, a non-City, non-Liverpool team. And even between City and Liverpool, there's separation with Arsenal. All right. Adam Armstrong may finish 60 plus points if he's on pens. What are you even talking about? If he plays 38 fixtures, he's already going to be on 76. Thanks for this, Beardy, as well. I appreciate you being here. What do I make of the Euro signing? I mean, as a Real Madrid fan, a little bit jealous because I think we saw him as a bit of a project player. But do I think he's going to suddenly transform the entire the United defense? I really don't think I can say that until I see that transformation, I suppose. I think it's good that United spent early in the window. I suppose that's a big change from what they've done in the past. And it seems like from what Ten Hag is saying that he's already seeing the sort of resources put into scouting and sort of departments in terms of recruitment already sort of reflecting that work and that he can see it. So I think that's nice from a manager to say, to be fair, and to suggest that there's organization within the team. But yeah, I think, look, am I expecting Man United to suddenly not be a horrific offense because Dani Olmo has been signed at the start of the season? I'd say no. I'd say I need to see more before I can actually change that my opinion on them for now. And that's opinion just based on, unfortunately, the way that they played for most of last season. So, yeah, those are my thoughts in terms of the cheat sheet so far. That's just the midfield position, unfortunately. Probably had to bed, but will be fun to keep going. 4 million goalkeeper. I mean, there's literally no interest in them. Unfortunately, this season we don't have anything to really talk about. Madueke, I think his minutes will probably drop a little bit this season. I think even his minutes dropped, close to the end as well. I think he was playing quite a fair bit actually under Poch, but I can't remember. I think even when Nkunku came back, Madueke suddenly played less minutes as well, right? Maybe I'm actually completely wrong about that, to be honest. I could just be waffling here. I think I am waffling. Yeah, sorry, no. Even at the end of the season, we saw. Well, no, actually, his minutes did drop, right? Because he was at one point around that sort of Aston Villa game when he had a huge game where I think he scored a brace. He was sort of playing 90 minutes a game, but then actually because Sterling came back, because Nkunku came back, we started to see some slightly earlier Madueke substitutions. So yeah, for example, like in that close to the last game of the season, when did Madueke come off? He came off at 64 minutes. So yeah, obviously, like I think his minutes will just be impacted going forwards. Wings got hard fixtures, won't score, won't assist. I think only good because guaranteed starter first price. Well, that's the whole point of a 4.5, right? Like if you just want 2 points, like, and you're willing to take 2 points, there's that. Sandro Martinez, he'll definitely be interesting. All right, I think that's it in terms of the video. As I said, I'll probably continue with the cheat sheet tomorrow. I might actually instead also just release the sort of best midfielders video soon once I have some time to look at. Once again, putting all the fixtures into place. I already know the fixtures in my head, but it's about also laying it out in a presentable way. And I think I'll also probably do a set piece video for you guys as well. If you guys want to see that, do let me know in chat. Like a little bit of a set piece takers video, a little bit of a video in terms of data on set pieces and set piece efficiency, which will also include penalty takers. Protagonist, thank you so much. Thank you for renewing as a member for 4 months. Really appreciate it, bro. Thanks for being around. And yeah, for obviously anyone who's interested, the membership is a good way to, if you want to support me, and if you want sort of potential suggestions or just an avenue to chat to me one-on-one at any point in the season, we have some other chats as well for members. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys. I'll probably see you guys tomorrow. Have a good evening or morning, wherever you are in the world, maybe even afternoon. So take care. Goodbye.